Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Brendan Hauser with EVOQ Bike. We have an awesome podcast today with Kevin Vermaerke, who's been at the World Tour for 4 years now. Raced the Giro, raced the Tour, has tips for juniors, talks about his training back in the Lux days, going into early season races, threshold training, over-unders, his specific VO2 workouts, taking beta-alanine. Yes, everybody, I'm going to try and send him Lactigo. There's so many gems in here. Kevin has a really good way of articulating everything going on in his cycling, race, mental aspects of the sport life and verbalizing it in ways that we can take action from. Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. Everybody, good luck with your training and racing. Enjoy the podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Man, appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, no, thanks for being flexible. I was knocked out completely last week. Had a fever for 2 days. Couldn't eat for a couple days. Just nothing was staying down. So yeah, I was in bed the whole week, so I was knocked out pretty good.
Oh, geez. Do you think so? I was reading on your team's recap from the Giro. Was that some of the trickle down when everybody got sick? Was that how bad some people were? Or do you think this was totally different?
No, I think this was totally different. This was like a stomach flu or something like that. And
Okay.
what was going around the Giro was a bit more of a respiratory bug, which I caught it in the first week. Um, I think I was pretty lucky, I think, because we had um, one of our guys, Bram, he got it first and he had it really bad. He had a fever, really like deep chest cough, and he left on stage 3, I think it was. Um, and then that was kind of around the time it went through our team. Most guys got it. And luckily, I didn't get it too bad. I had a cough that kind of lasted for most of the race, but it wasn't, I never had fever. I just felt like I had a cold for a few days. And luckily, it was the first, like the easier part of the race. So I think that kind of helped me get over it. But yeah, I think by the end of the race, everybody in the whole race had it. You could hear everyone coughing, and
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it definitely spread.
That sounds terrible, especially during a grand tour. And I love that you call any of those stages easy. It's as we watch it, it all looks brutal to us. So, well, we'll definitely get into the Giro. Let's do a quick intro for a few people that might not know who you are. If you can introduce yourself and just, yeah, give us a quick little bio.
Yeah, I'm my name's Kevin Vermaerke. I'm an American. Grew up in Orange County, California. Um, Started out mountain biking, and then when I was a junior, I was lucky enough to be on the Lux cycling program, ran by Roy Nickman, and from there, that kind of gave me the opportunity to come over to Europe with USA Cycling and do a bit of road racing over here, in addition to the mountain biking that I was doing, and from there, the results I got as a junior helped me get on Axel Merckx's team, Ogdensburg Action, and from there, I really just focused full time on the road. I gave up the mountain bike and kind of saw myself trending more towards a career on the road. And um, yeah, so I've been in the World Tour for 4 years now. I'm 23. It I still feel young, but at the same time, I also feel like I've spent quite a bit of time in the World Tour now, and I definitely, with all the young guys that come in every year, you feel older and older. But yeah, I'd say I'm, still figuring myself out in the World Tour, and I think especially this year and last year I made some big steps in kind of figuring out where I want to go and what I want to do. But yeah, I've kind of just been a slow and steady, you know, builder, I would say, through my career. And yeah, I've been on DSM now, which was formerly Sunweb when I signed with the team for my whole career in the World Tour. And yeah, this is year number 4 now.
That's awesome. Can you go in a little bit more on when you're talking about figuring yourself out in the world tour? What was that like? What did you say to yourself in the first year? Hey, this is just what I'm going to try and accomplish as you were then 19, right?
Yeah, so I was 19 when I signed the contract to go to the World Tour, and it's for so many years that's the end goal, is to make it to the World Tour, and you're a junior, um, racing in Europe, trying to figure out how to get on. At the time, Action was my dream team,
Mm.
and then from there you want to get on a world tour team, and that kind of seems like the be all and end all of, how that's what you've been working towards since you're 15, 16 years old. And I think well, the way I look at it is it's, getting to the world tour is actually the easy part, I would say. And once you get to the world tour, then that's when the hard work starts, and you have to kind of figure out how to keep your spot in the world tour. Especially in cycling, it's a very replaceable sport. So I think, you know, you just have to have the confidence in yourself and the faith to kind of trust the process in the first couple years, and have the long-term vision to just say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to get. And, especially in the first couple years, like for example, my first year was just about living in Europe. It's like, I was dreaming about all these races and everything, but, I came over in January, and had to get somewhere, find somewhere to live. You have to get your residency card. At the time, I was living in Girona, Spain, so I had to get my residency card and set up Wi-Fi, get insurance. It's all these little things that you never even thought about when you signed the contract, or, you dreamed of racing in the Tour de France. But, I'd say especially my first year, I really, in the beginning, struggled a bit, I think, to get all that set up. And I think it impacted my racing in the beginning. Just trying to use a lot of my energy, and I was quite a bit of stress around just making sure I had a comfortable life situation set up in Europe. And you're away from your family, you're away from friends, and all the the comforts of home. It's one thing to get your Wi-Fi or your cell plan set up in when you go down to the Verizon store, and you just got to ask them, what do I need, this is my situation, what do I need? But when you don't speak the language, and the culture is different, you don't know when the store is going to be open, because for some reason it's closed in the middle of the day, and they're closed on Monday and Tuesday, just because it's just a different culture. And I think that's a lot of I think a lot of Americans speak about it a lot, but I think it's definitely something that goes a bit unnoticed, is for these foreign riders who have to come over and set up a life in Europe. You know, the racing takes a bit of a back burner in the beginning. So for me, that was kind of, that first year was more about trying to figure out my situation. And I think once you feel comfortable and stable in that regard, that's kind of when you can, your racing will take the next step.
That's really interesting. And when you had used the term trust the process, and let's kind of maybe talk about that first year or two, because let's assume you're probably not trying to win a race at that point. You're not strong. And correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe does the team or your coach say, "Hey, here's like the success bullet points. This is what we want you to achieve," or is it just, you're getting bottles in the cars for the big races? You're really more of a domestique rider, and or maybe I'm totally off base on that. Like, what were your goals for those first couple years, so you could say, "Hey, that was successful," aside from maybe just getting stronger as a cyclist?
Yeah, I think, DSM was really proactive in kind of setting up like, a long-term plan for me. And that was really one of the main attractions for me when I came to the team. I went to a training camp as a stagiaire. When at the time I was only 18. It was after my first year under 23. And, you know, after my first week with the team, I kind of had to sit down with management just in the lobby of the hotel. And they were like, over the next 3 years, this is where we see you, you know, what we see you developing into as a rider. And, I also had a bit of say and input in what I felt like I could do and achieve. And, I think having a 3 year plan, if you will, was really important for me, because a lot of neo-pro contracts are only 2 years. And for me, I felt like 3 years was, enough time for me to feel like the team believes in me, and that I had the time to kind of progress, and not have the stress of, feeling like I needed to perform right away. And,
Right.
when I signed my World Tour contract, I wasn't, the next Remco, or, a Pogacar or someone like that with crazy results that was expected to perform right away. Um, but, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and being the same age as Remco and some of these other kids, I mean, I saw what Remco did his first year as a pro, and I believed in myself as well, that I could, get to the point where I could perform at that level. So yeah, DSM came in and they just said, we'll offer you a 3-year contract, and the first year will be pretty low key. We'll do some of the smaller pro races, kind of focus on trying to up your load in training and racing. I mean, when I was under 23 and junior, I was doing maybe 30, 40 race days a year. Um, Especially my second year under 23, which was the year before I turned pro, was 2020. So I think I did maybe 10 race days that year. And, then you go to the pro ranks, and, um, yeah, that first year was kind of about getting the experience and, some bigger races, but doing smaller races, learning how the team works, learning how to go to the races, how to travel. And, I think that also, that easier first year program wise, also allowed me to, set up my life, in Europe, and focus on some of those things that were, off the bike, taking up a lot of time and energy.
Mm.
But I still got some big starts. I mean, like I was, you know, at that point, 2021 was still, kind of in COVID times. So there were races that were getting canceled, postponed. There's still a bit of uncertainty around the program for the year. And I remember I was a reserve for Strada Bianchi in March. And I had done one small pro race in France with the team, but I got a call like 2 days before the race, like, oh, someone's sick, and we needed to come fly to Italy tomorrow, and you're racing Strada. And I was just, that was pretty cool for me. It was a big experience, my first World Tour race, and I really just got thrown in the deep end there. And I think that's kind of how I learn best is, getting stuck in, you get your butt kicked, but you can go back and say, okay, well, it was pretty depressing to, be in the last group on the road, but, I finished, and you can just use it as a benchmark for, how to get better and how to come back next time, and take the step up.
What do you remember from that day aside from being in the last group? Maybe good
I
lessons
just
learned or
I
something.
just remember being so out of my element. I mean, I had no business being there. It was yeah, I just like the speed was pretty high, and like when the race really kicked off, I just yeah, I was crazy. The funniest thing I remember is that we had Roman Bardet there, who was kind of a protected rider, and then also Timon Earnsman was there, and I think it was Timon who had a flat tire, and they told me on the radio, like, wait, because the cars are so far back in Strada, they said, like, give a wheel to Timon, and I was so out of it, like, so, just in the car struggling, like, didn't know where I was on the road, and like for some reason I thought Timon was behind me, so they told me to like wait and give a wheel, so I'm like looking behind me, like, where is he? Like I thought he was coming riding up to me, and then the team car comes past, like out of the dust, out of nowhere, and they're just like, "What are you doing? Like go, go, go!" He's up, he's in front of you still, and it just like I was suffering so much, I had no idea what was going on. So yeah, it's just things like that I remember that and that no one even remembered it after the race, but for me it was just like embarrassing, and I was like, oh man, this is first World Tour race, and I'm just out here. What am I doing? But yeah, it's that's also the races you learn the most from.
That's a really good memory. What did you talk to people about that experience afterwards? That they were like, "Man, just brush this off and keep moving forward," or is that just your mindset? Like, "Hey, I'm going to learn from this, and whatever crap happens."
Yeah, I didn't bring it up afterwards. I just learned from it, but it's also like, in a race like that, it's 5.5 hours of so many little moments that are almost by the end forgotten about, because, there's so many things that happened even after that in the race. And by the time you get to the finish, it's, you know, sometimes you just forget about things that happen in the race. So, yeah, I didn't want to refresh anyone's memory about that one in the moment. So yeah, but yeah, it was pretty funny.
Let's jump back a few years actually. You mentioned Hagens Berman as your dream team, and I think for a lot of the younger listeners, they would agree. We've been fortunate to have some of those riders on the podcast also. Just such an amazing program. You won Liege U23 with those guys. What do you remember about that part of your season? Maybe even things going into that race or on race day. It's obviously 5 years ago now, so maybe distant memory, or where does that rank for you in career wins that maybe mean something to you?
I mean, it's the last time I won a race, so it's I still remember it. It is a long time ago now, and yeah, it changed my career, so I definitely remember it pretty vividly. Um, I mean, even just that whole first part of the season really kind of changed the trajectory of my career. With when I joined Hagens Berman Action, um, there were two Americans, me and Sean Quinn, who's on EF now, who were from our year as juniors. We joined Axel's team, and I mean, there was some big names on the team like Joao Almeida, Mikkel Bjerg, who was a two-time world champion in time trial at that point, and it was pretty daunting. I mean, Johnny Brown was U.S. Pro National Champion, and these guys were also 21, 22 years old. So when you're 18, it's you're like, oh, you're riding with the big boys now. And I just remember just being really excited at the opportunity, and I trained really hard over the winter, and just from the first training camp in February, I bonded really well with everyone on the team, and it was just a really good vibe, when you're surrounded by world champions and national champions and guys that have already won at the biggest races in the under 23 circuit. You just kind of feed off of that mentality and the confidence. So yeah, I came back from that first training camp really motivated, and then had about a month of training at home before my first race of the season, which was Redlands. Um, and I went to Redlands, not really sure what to expect, but in the first time trial, I was fifth, and Sean won, and Thomas Rivard got second, I think. So we went 1, 2, 5 in the time trial. And the time I'm terrible at time trials, so that was like, I was really pretty stoked on that result. And then yeah, the next day I won stage two, and then I was in the yellow jersey, and yeah, I kept it until the last day. I think I on the last day I lost the lead, but I think the whole race I kind of just, to be in the yellow jersey and have won a stage already on stage two, it was like, wow, this season's already a success. If you had asked me before the start, like, would you win? Would you be happy with a win at Redlands? I would have been happy with like a top five at Redlands. So that was a big confidence booster. And then, you go from that, and then you come over to Europe, but it's a different beast in Europe, and you're not sure how that will translate. Um, but yeah, I mean, Liège was the first under 23 race I did. I'd done a small Italian pro race before that, Coppi Bartoli, as my first race in Europe, and it was that was the first time I raced the World Tour teams, and I was a bit out of my depth there, but I think I was like 35th or something on GC, and I was happy with that, and I felt pretty good in the race. So when I went into Liège, I just you know hey, I had actually had a cold the whole week before the race, and then I just woke up on the day of the race, and everything was just it was like a movie where you just wake up and everything clicks, everything went right. And yeah, I had an incredible day on the bike, and I won, and that was really just kind of came out of the blue. And when I won, it was, everything changed from there. Like once you get a win at that level, um, I mean, it's just every race you go into with so much more confidence, and you've beaten everyone there. A lot of the best under 23s were there, and that kind of just, once I had that under my belt, I just said, why can't I win the next one? And I
Mm.
think that really helped me in my under 23 career. And it also, I was only 18 at the time, so it gained me a lot of interest from the World Tour teams, which, was also really motivating for me.
You talked about the confidence, and you used the term winning mentality. When you think winning mentality, what is that? And you were with Johnny Brown and other world champs. What were you drawing from them that made you go in on that a little bit?
I think when you're surrounded by those guys, it just became normalized. It's,
Mm.
I think it's a lot of people show up to race, but there's really only a handful of people that show up to win. And I think that's the most important thing, even to this day in the World Tour races, like you go to the Giro and it's like, when you look at the GC race, like only one guy showed up to win, and that was Pogačar. Like, these guys, like, when you have someone that's so much better, I mean, there was a lot of talk around. It's almost like a race for second, because everyone feels like he's so much better. And, obviously he is so much better, but just that mental switch of, really believing like, when you show up to a race, you're there to win. I think across any discipline or category, that's the biggest difference, even more so than the physical difference is just, you know, the people that really want to win, like they show up on the line, they believe they can win. And a lot of people have a lot of doubt in the back of their mind. They missed a couple training sessions, or they had a late night a few nights ago, or, they just kind of have these excuses building in the back of their head. But I think the real difference between a winner and, someone who's just not quite able to get there is someone that can just show up and say, you know what, like today, like it was like with Liège. I was sick the week before, but I just, with my coach, I had just been like, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to wake up and it is what it is, but I'm going to show up to win the race, and it'll be what it'll be. So I think there's quite a large mental part of the sport that goes unnoticed, and I think that's the main difference between the guys that are really winning at the highest level and the rest.
That's incredible. Talking about Redlands, very appropriate for a lot of the American listeners here. What type of training did you focus on back then? Do you remember like bread and butter sessions, or just things that you felt like got you really ready for the race season?
Yeah, so at the time I was working with my the coach who coached me for my whole junior and under 23 career, Simon Kessler.
Okay.
Um, he's I don't know if you've heard about him before, but he has a coaching business in the US and has coached quite a few of the juniors that kind of came up through Lux and
Hmm.
Velo Sport, which was another SoCal based team where I originally started. But he's actually a family friend, and him and my dad grew up racing together in South Africa, and he was there when I was born, and he's always just been a close family friend. And so when I was 14 or 15 years old, kind of getting into cycling, he started coaching me, and then, it kind of all grew from there. And that first year under 23, when I was kind of in that off season before Redlands, I was doing um, a lot of threshold work. So like a lot of kind of 15-minute threshold efforts, a lot of over unders. Um, I always felt like as an under 23, over unders were my favorite workout, kind of like 20 minutes with 4 minutes at like sub threshold, 1 minute at kind of VO2. Um, Repeat that. And also a lot of motor pacing. I was doing my dad. We had a little like Honda scooter, and my dad would just go out and would motor pace back and forth in Santiago Canyon, and yeah, I just felt like that leg speed, and then the ability to just like push all day really helped me in those kind of under 23 and first couple pro races I was doing, where I knew like I didn't have that super explosive ability, but kind of the ability to always just push was a bit more important, say, than maybe now, which now I really don't do as much threshold work, or as much of that steady state work. I think partly in due to the way the racing I do now substitutes in a bit more for that. But yeah, before Redlands, I was doing a lot of motor pacing and a lot of over unders. I remember that.
That's awesome. Can you go in a little bit more on the training now then? So maybe if I heard it correctly, the racing is sort of taking place of a lot of the intensity from training, or correct me on that. And do you ever do any intervals anymore, even during a race block, or how does that sort of shake out? And let's maybe not like the Giro, maybe if you're in spring classics time, I mean, you're still racing a ton then. So I don't know. How does that going on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, my training has also changed quite a bit over the years. But for example, if you kind of look at from when I started training in the off season until now, you kind of have the preseason period and then the racing period. Um, and once you start racing, it's really, you don't anymore have that, 3, 4 week period where you can really get in a massive block. It's more of, you know, consolidating the work that you did preseason, and then maybe if you can, a few top up sessions in between races. But coming into the season, I did um, just quite a bit of volume endurance work. Um, this season, more than previous seasons, I've done more zone two work, so kind of up to my LT1 threshold on endurance days. And then other than that, just a lot of big gear sprints, high cadence sprints, and then some shorter VO2s. So like one of the key sessions I did since December was, at least once a week, I would do 5 by 3 minutes full gas with 3 minute recovery in between, and then repeat 3 by 3 minutes in the end of the ride. Um, so kind of, honestly, not too much, nothing too fancy. I had 2 or 3 key sessions that I would kind of repeat weekly. But mainly it was just building up that volume with the endurance, pretty easy endurance a lot of the times, and then always working on the super high end VO2 to kind of keep that going. Um, but I think, to go back to last year, I finished my first Grand Tour at the Tour, and I think that really, like, to explain the training I did this off season, I think you have to go back to next last year, and kind of last year was the first year where I really had a full season where I didn't have an injury or I didn't have a big period of sickness or anything like that. And I was just able to stay really consistent throughout the year. I think I did like 74 race days maybe. And, I finished the tour, and it was just, a much bigger load than I'd ever done before. And, I think I was able to really recover well between all the races and kind of keep pushing the limit, like after the tour, I had 2 days off the bike, and then already on Wednesday I was doing 3 hours with some sprints and a few efforts to kind of keep the body ticking over, because the next weekend I had San Sebastian, then the World Championships, and then like every weekend I kept racing after the tour. And I think that was really key actually, because um, even in the third week of the tour, my body was reacting really well, and I felt like I was able to recover and do some of my best numbers of the race in the third week. And I really wanted to just push myself to the limit, and so that's why after the race, I was really keen to just keep racing, keep racing, keep racing. And then I eventually found the limit. I did Quebec and Montreal, and after that, I got super sick. I got the flu, um, and then still went back to Europe and did a few small Italian races at the end of the season. But I was just a shell. But I really felt that it was important to get the overcompensation of all that racing, and then in the off season recover, take a few weeks off, and I mean, the difference I felt from immediately when I started training in the off season was just night and day. Like I was a completely different rider, and I think that's kind of, everyone says like your first Grand Tour gives you a massive boost, but it really, like, there's no way you can simulate like exposure like that in training. And I think if you do it properly and you're able to recover well, it's really, you can really see a lot of benefits from it.
That's amazing. I love the breakdown. Two questions popped up from that. You had mentioned the top up sessions in between races. Would those be that short VO2 stuff, or do you have something different that you do? Say you have a race on Saturday, you might not race till next Saturday. You're like, Tuesday or Wednesday, I need to like hit it a little bit. Is there anything specific you do during the midweek, or was that what you were talking about before?
Yeah, so if it would fit, then like that 5 by 3 minute session would definitely be in
Got it.
there.
Okay.
And then that's also, kind of a good way to compare that session to in the season to when I was doing it back in January. So I didn't do it too much, but I think this year I went to altitude in April. And then after I came back from altitude, I did the Ardennes Classics, and then I had like a week before I went to Eschborn, Frankfurt before the Giro, and I in that week I did that session for the first time since since January, and the difference was pretty motivating. So yeah, I think. But like I said, I only did it once since January. So once you really start racing so much, it's definitely more about just recovering and trying to build the consistency. I mean, that's the most important thing. Like, just if you can build week on week and, avoid getting sick, avoid little injuries here and there, you'll see so much improvement. And I think that was something that kind of all came together this year for me.
So that was gonna be my question. On the flip side of the intensity, how do you treat rest days? Do you and rest weeks, let's say?
Rest weeks. This is the first rest week I've had since like the break I took in the off season. So there's not too many rest weeks. And then rest days. Typically, I'll do just an easy ride. Like if I'm at home in the U.S. or if my girlfriend's here and we want to go for do something for a day, then maybe I would take a complete day off the bike. But just like for my mental rest, I need to do like an easy ride just to feel like I did something. But I do also think it is a mental thing because, I think at times a complete rest day is also super important. I mean, you really don't gain anything from doing 1 hour at 120 watts. It's more just that, if it's going to make you feel more comfortable mentally, then I think for sure then it's the best bet.
Did you, when you were younger, and I'm more asking for maybe the Cat 3s and newer riders that are listening, do you find any benefit from like the more traditional rest week that we read about? Hey, take 3 or 4 days easy, maybe like an opener's ride in there. Or do you feel like, don't really need it? You can go long periods of time and just, do you then take a break when you get sick or like a life break happens?
I used to always do rest weeks when I was a junior. So
Okay.
I would definitely, yeah, I think it's super important for if you're maybe, if you're not a professional cyclist and you're a bit more, I think it depends how your races are structured. Like now, as a pro, you have so many race days. If I look back at when I was a junior and under 23, it was pretty clear like blocks, so I would have like an important race coming up and I'd have a training block before that race. Um, and in that case, I think, doing like a 3 week training block with one rest week cycle afterwards, that could work really well. Um, for me now, it's kind of like, you need to come into the season ready to go with a really good base that will kind of carry you through the season. But once you start racing, you're not going to really have those super targeted training blocks anymore unless you go to altitude. So you kind of need to be flexible enough to always be maintaining that shape. I mean, I think you need to hold like 90% of your form for, a 3 month period in terms of, compared to when you're younger or, maybe if you're a cat 3 and you have a big important race coming up, you can try and peak towards that 100% fitness when you need it. And yeah, in that case, I think a rest week can be really important.
Hmm. Awesome advice. Let's talk about the Giro. And it was really good insights from the tour of just things that changed you completely as a rider. What's something about the Grand Tour that maybe we don't get to take in from the fan side or, favorite memory from this year? I'm sure there were a lot. It's just such an incredible race.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't planning to do the Giro, but there was a bit of like a lineup change back in February. So, from the end of February on, I knew I was going to the Giro. But it wasn't kind of like a big goal I had trained for during the off season. Um, but after having done the tour last year, I was pretty excited to try the Giro and just compare it, but also going into my Grand Tour, just more confident that I knew how my body would feel in the third week, and I felt like I had a bit better of an understanding of how I could perform. And I have to say the Giro and the Tour are completely different. I would say
Hmm.
the tour was 10 times harder. And I think maybe that could be because, like I said earlier, I felt like, the tour was kind of an overcompensation last year. And then once I recovered, I really took a step up. So maybe it just felt a bit easier. But, I think like even just the way that each day was raced, like um, last year at the tour, it really was just each day was like, you couldn't even think that it was like, don't think about tomorrow, because it was just trying to recover from each day. And I think that also comes because, it's just so stressful at the tour. And that's probably the thing you hear the most, but there's so many fans, there's so much pressure. The speed is so high. And I think that's just something you feel, you feel it when you get up to the start in the bus and you're looking out at the crowds, and you feel it in the meeting when the director puts a little more pressure on the key points, and you feel it when you go to sign on and the crowd is just 5 times bigger than any other race. And I think all those little things, it just kind of adds up. And when you're in the peloton at the tour, you're at the Tour de France. And at the Giro, it kind of felt like, when you're in the peloton, you could have been at any other race,
Hmm.
any other big race, big monument, or big 1 week race. But the tour was definitely its own beast. So I think the Giro definitely felt more relaxed than I was expecting. Um, but we went with Roman for the GC and Fabio Jakobsen for the sprints. So we kind of had a two-pronged approach. And it's interesting how every team shows up to the race, because you have teams like EF who don't have a GC guy or a sprinter. They're just going for stages every day. And then you have teams like Ineos who have a GC guy and no sprinter. And teams like Quickstep who have a sprinter but no GC guy. And so every team tries to manage the race a bit differently. And I think we tried to go in with focusing on the GC and the sprints, and that kind of gives you a purpose and a goal every day. It's not like, oh, it's a sprint day, I'm just gonna hang at the back and recover a bit today, like no stress. It's like, no, you're gonna be there like 10 in the last 10K positioning, so it's yeah, it definitely just makes every day a bit more focused.
That last 10K, what's going through your mind in that period? Because that frightens me. I watch you guys, and I think most of us are on the edge of our seats. What is it like being in that saddle?
It frightens me too, to be honest. But the thing is, it happens like it starts 50, like it starts 80K to go, and that's always the thing. Like when I'm back at home, or like if I'm watching a race and with my dad or something, if I happen to be home, and or just watching a race with like people that aren't, you know, haven't been in the pro peloton before, and you just, even when you listen to the announcer, they're just saying like, oh, looks like the teams are starting to, they're starting to find a position here. And it, like, when the stress, and like it's crazy. I mean, even the speed is always just so high, but like when the road blocks with 80K to go, if you're not in the front, you're not going to get to the front. And just the stress of having a director in your ear, like everyone's director is in their ear saying the same thing, like at this point you have to be in the front. And only 7 guys can be across the road in the front, but there's 180 guys trying to be there. And
So crazy.
yeah, it's crazy. So the last 10K is especially hectic, but it starts so early now. And I think it's actually incredible how skilled everybody is, because sometimes these massive crashes happen, but for every big crash that happens, there's maybe 1,000 times when there's a sketchy situation or a piece of road furniture that comes out of nowhere, and everyone's able to stay on their bike and keep it upright, which I think says a lot about how skilled everybody is for the dangers we're taking. But yeah, so, I mean, you really just have to shut your brain off sometimes and just go for it, and that can be pretty nerve-wracking.
That's amazing. It's amazing to hear 80K out because, yeah, you guys are wild. I love maybe in the past 3 or 4 years, some of the on bike cameras have, you hear everybody screaming and you can see when people start hitting it. It's just added a whole other dimension as camera work gets better. And yeah, I'm excited for cycling to get more of that in your, we'll say, driver's seat viewpoint, because it's incredible what you guys and ladies are doing. Do you know, will you be doing the tour this year?
No, thankfully not. I think if I had to do the tour now on the back of the Giro, I would be toast for the rest
I
of the
was
year.
wondering what your thought process was on that. So, is the Vuelta ever in the cards?
Um, I don't think so. I think in the second half of the year, I'll focus a bit more on I'll do some smaller pro races, like Czech Tour, Arctic Race in Norway, and I'm pretty excited about that because
Yeah.
I've gotten to the point now where I've done two Grand Tours, quite a few monuments, and I mean those are the highest level of racing, so it's really exciting. Um, but when you show up in Pogacar and Remco and Vingegaard are there, there's only so many opportunities. And I think, just even like we said earlier, I mean, Liège was last time I won a proper race, and that was 5 years ago. So I think, over the course of the last 4 years, I've taken a lot of steps up in terms of physical maturity and experience. And, now I feel like I am kind of at that level to start having a bit of a breakthrough. And I think if I can go to these smaller races and get the wins there first, then that's kind of where you breed that confidence that I was talking about earlier. And I'll also do San Sebastian and Quebec, Montreal, the World Championships, hopefully. So, I really want to focus on these races where I can go for a result and try and really show myself. So I'm, yeah, really excited now to have a bit of a break, and then I'm actually going to head home to the US on the weekend, and then do some altitude over the summer, and then kind of reset, refocus, and then come back for the second half of the year.
That's awesome. I mean, in 2023 Norway, you won youth classification and then came in second in the Deutschland Tour, I think, like the next week or a couple weeks after, something like that. So,
Second on a stage, but on GC, I think I was seventh or something.
okay. So, gunning for a win at Norway?
Yeah, Norway and Czech Tour both suit me pretty well. So yeah, GC wins there would be pretty cool. And yeah, I'll take anyone I can get, but yeah, I'm just really kind of have that period of the season highlighted to really perform. So I'm motivated to kind of get back to work and have that goal to work towards.
You mentioned some changes physically that you're seeing in your body as you mature. Is it things that you've worked on specifically off the bike at all, or is it just some of these adaptations that are happening from the mega blocks, the grand tours? What have you noticed about yourself that's changed maybe from getting into the world tour to today?
I think it's a little bit of everything, but I think the most important for sure would be that kind of mega adaptation from just the racing. And kind of one of the metrics that my coach and I look at to track that is so basically my coach will look at the highest um, normalized power that I do for 1 hour in a race and where that falls. So in my first couple of years as a pro, that would usually come quite early in the race, like in the first 2 hours of the race. At some point, I would do my highest 1 hour power, and maybe that was jumping for the breakaway or kind of when the pre-final was starting. Already, I was kind of at my limit there, and that's kind of been one of the things we've tracked over the last couple of years, and then through training in the off season, but then also kind of getting stronger within the races, really trying to hit the metric of saying, okay, let's see if we can hit 100% of your threshold critical power in the final, in the final of the race. And that's kind of been something we've tracked. And then this year, I've finally been consistently able to hit that number of 100% of my critical power towards the final of races, which is um, the most important thing, I think, in these big monuments and Grand Tour stages is your fatigue resistance and, your ability to do that power when it matters, which is after 220K or after 5.5, 6 hours. That's something that I've really worked on and seen the most growth in.
That's amazing. That's a really cool way to track that. Do you do anything off the bike in terms of strength training? And if so, how does that change throughout the phases of the season?
I do strength training. So in the off season, I'll do it pretty consistently twice a week, and it's nothing super groundbreaking or too extensive. It's basically I'll do squats, Bulgarian split squats, step ups, deadlift, um, and then not crazy high weight either. But I'll kind of go through a build phase, and then once I get to the point where my coach is happy, I'll just do maintenance twice a week. And I think, I feel it's not so much as for performance on the bike, but just for injury prevention and in general I mean, it's like I was saying about that recovery rides earlier, I think it's more of a mental thing. Like when you just helps you feel stronger, you feel a bit more complete. And I think that's something that, really works for me. So I'll do 2 week sessions or 2 sessions per week in the off season, building into the race period. And then obviously then once you start racing, it becomes a bit more, time restricted. And if I can fit in 1 session per week between traveling, I will. Um, but it takes a back seat during the race season, so I'm not doing so much.
Okay. Stretching, yoga, that type of stuff at all, or is it just riding?
Yeah, I'm doing that every day. So I do core and stretching in the morning before I go training, and it's like 10, 15 minutes, kind of a routine I go through. It's um, yeah, just a bit for to feel looser on the bike and not so, not too tight in the morning when I get out in the beginning. So I'll do some core, some stretching, and then um, I usually foam roll before I go to bed in the night. That's something that I've felt like, you know, perceived recovery is it seems to be higher when I do that. So I try and do that every night as well.
Cool. Let's talk race nutrition. What I'm just gonna open it up at that. You do a lot of different types of races, so maybe it changes, or maybe it's the same thing over and over and over again. What's Kevin doing for race day?
For race day, it's always pretty similar. I mean, we're pretty restricted with the products that we can use. So our team uses Sanis. I think I know you had Frank on a few weeks ago, and
Yeah.
yeah, we use Sanis products, which are you know, there's nothing groundbreaking there. Let's put it this way, but basically each product there has 30 grams of carbs. They have like a bigger, kind of more substantial bar, an endurance bar they call it, a fruit bar, which is a little more like a little easier to get down, more moist, not as dry, and then gels and drink mix. But everything is 30 grams of carbs. So like one bottle is 30 grams, one gel, one bar is all 30 grams. So um, it depends a bit, on the race and on the stage. Like in the 1 day races, I'll always kind of aim for, well, I mean, I guess I don't aim for anything per hour. In the end, it will always work out to about 100 grams, 110 grams an hour of carbs. Um, but it's not like I'm, you know, saying, "Oh, we've been racing for 20 minutes. I'm going to take a gel," or it's kind of more based off of feeling and like natural hunger. I mean, especially in these like in the Giro stages, like sometimes it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours for the breakaway to go, and it's easy to just be jumping and trying to follow the moves, and you can forget about eating. But I'm always pretty careful just to like have a couple gels ready for that first beginning period, and then whenever it eases up for a second, just smash a gel super quick. Um, and then once the race settles down, you can kind of then get on top of your normal fueling strategy. Obviously, it's a lot easier. Um, and that's where I'll kind of supplement with the bars and kind of heavier nutrition. I know a lot of guys are now saying like, oh, I only do gels or only liquid carbs, but I really feel like I need something a bit more substantial. Um, I like to just have a bar during the stage or have something to chew on. And so I'll do that kind of in the middle portion, and then in the last couple hours, it'll just only be gels.
What about on training days? Are you focused so you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want? How does that shape up? Say you're doing a 5 hour ride with some efforts.
On training, I'm definitely a little bit more relaxed about it. So, in races, I'll have a super strict, I'll be feeling a lot on the bike, um, compared to training where it's a bit more, day by day, depends what session I have. If I just have an easy 5 hour endurance ride, then I'll kind of just go a little more off the cuff and, have a bit of a bigger breakfast, maybe not eat for the first 2 hours of the ride, and then really feel based off of, when I'm hungry, then eating, um, not being too caught up on like, X amount of grams per hour. Um, and I think that depends on the session because then if I really have a hard day, like say it's those 5 by 3 minute efforts and they're going to come after 3,000 kilojoules, then I'll really be sharp on, starting with 2 bottles, maybe with sugar water in there. So 100 grams per bottle, have that over the first 3 hours, 4 hours of the ride, and then really be feeling the work that I'm doing. So if it's a key session, I'll definitely focus more on nutrition. And if it's just an endurance ride or a shorter ride under 3 hours, I'll be a bit more relaxed about it. But in training, I tend to do more of I'd rather have a bigger breakfast and a bigger lunch than eating more on the bike. Um, and that's something that's really different to the races because in the races, a lot of the times, like at the Grand Tours and the 1 week races, we're on this program called personalized plates. So the breakfast is tracked and then the lunch is tracked and the that's based on what you're feeling with during the race. So you send your race intake to the nutritionist
Hmm.
and then around that they'll calculate the meals that you need. So when I'm doing that, I definitely find that my breakfast is smaller than I would have at home, say, before I go out training. Um, but then as a result, I feel more on the bike and it feels, I feel really like that's when I'm at my best. But just when I'm at home and relaxed in a relaxed environment, I tend to kind of prefer just to have a bigger breakfast and then not eat so much on the bike, just to let my stomach, rest a bit.
That's really interesting. What's the reception to this personalized plates program amongst your teammates and other people having it pretty like divvied out for them?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
If I could live on this program, I would live on it.
Oh, was not expecting that answer. Cool. Just because
Yeah,
it's
no,
simple or and like they're taking care
yeah,
of all the details?
it's just amazing. Like I think it's really, obviously at the highest level, nutrition is incredibly important. And at a grand tour, I actually don't know how. Like if it was a buffet and I was serving myself, I think it would be really hard to manage weight during a grand tour because it's just like so much energy expenditure every day. Um, but then also, some days the energy expenditure isn't as big as you think. Maybe that's because you had a big day the day before, um, or vice versa. But I mean, I've always been someone that was kind of like, yeah, I mean, as a junior and under 23, it was just like, night before the race, your plate better be heaped with pasta and like, you don't leave the table until you're full. And that's just, why did you do it? I don't know. You just do it because you have to carbo load. Like that's what you were told. And I've definitely found through personalized plates and then kind of experimenting with what works best for me, like you actually don't need to be, as carbo loaded as I think it's a bit overhyped. Like, I think a lot of times you're probably eating more than you need to in terms of like loading up on carbs. Like if you're, if you're dialed in the few days before the race, like you shouldn't be coming in depleted enough that you really need to like overcompensate with carbs. And I think obviously now in the races, the carb intake is going way up compared to what it was a few years ago. So I think, with all those factors combined, it kind of means that like I was saying, the breakfasts maybe aren't as big as you would think. And in the end, like you go to bed every night and you're like, you feel like perfectly satiated, but not like stuffed and you're not starving. And I think after 3 weeks, kind of being able to manage that, it just makes your life so much easier. And I know I have some friends and guys on other teams who, like, the way they'll do it is that the team cook will cook all the food, and then they'll get like a message or a PDF or something of like, you need X grams of pasta, X grams of sauce, and then they actually have to measure it out onto their plate. And I think that would crack me. Like, just, every day after the stage, coming back and having that extra bit of work to do, and in the morning, like having to weigh it out. I think it's just really mentally, saves you a lot of energy having your plate is there in the morning, you know what's on it, and you know it's enough, you know it's what you need. And yeah, you can just like enjoy the meal, and then head off to the race, and have faith in it. So that's something that's really, yeah, I found it to be important, and also really helpful in just knowing, like, okay, when I'm at home training, like, you get a sense for portion sizes, and at what meal you should be eating, different amounts, and that's just something that has really worked out for me. So I love it. If I could do it at home, I definitely would.
That's amazing. I love that. I'm curious if we'll see a course correction on some of the carb loading and just other guests that we've had that have not been the biggest fans. We've had a nutritionist that was questioning, where have these, 9 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight really come from, and theory versus in practice. So it's interesting to hear you say that of maybe these meals aren't as big as we would expect you to say of the heaping pasta that everybody talks about. So yeah, I appreciate that insight. Any supplements or anything else besides natural foods that you use?
No, we're pretty conservative on that. We just have, basics like vitamin D, omega 3s. When we go to altitude, we'll do iron and zinc. And then we take beta alanine as well.
Mm.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's
Oh yeah.
essentially buffers lactate. And I don't know how. I think everyone takes it. I don't know how much how much gain there actually is with it, but yeah, that's kind of the only like non-traditional one that we take. But yeah, I like now I've just stopped taking it. I think I was taking it from March until the end of the Giro, and like, you take it in the morning on an empty stomach, and you get like the tingly
Yeah, dude.
fingertips, and you're scratching your neck at breakfast, and we always joke about it at the table because it's yeah, like the beta alanine itches are coming on, and yeah, that's about it. But yeah, not too much else.
So if you ever want to, not to, this won't turn to commercial because people hate. I love finding products that help me race faster in my amateur world. And if you've heard of Lactigo, it's we take beta alanine so that it makes carnosine. It bonds with the L-histidine in the body. And this product Lactigo is the only product that's topical carnosine. It actually the science came from an Italian pharmaceutical company. It's a very interesting story that I won't get into, but I'm gonna send you some if you want to try it. There's no tingle. Stuff is amazing. It's like for me and my amateur numbers, it was setting PRs. And this guy called me. He's like, "Hey, I saw you wrote an article on beta alanine. You want to try this?" I'm like, "Whatever, dude." It's in the hockey world.
Okay.
And the first time I used it, I said, okay, wait, what is actually in this? Is this legal?" So I'll get with you offline if you ever want to try it, man. It's yeah, no tingles. I love it.
All right. Yeah, I love
Um,
I love stuff like that, and always trying, like, trying the latest and greatest, and seeing how it works. So I love that stuff.
Yeah. So actually, where are you guys at with ketones and like you and your world tour buddies?
In the World Tour, they're super prevalent now, but on DSM, they're a big no-no. So
Really?
yeah, strictly prohibited. And I think that's mainly because of the, like, they say the long-term health consequences aren't super well documented. Obviously, they're a pretty recent trend. I
Hmm.
mean, they've been around for a while now, but like the heavy usage, I would say, is still pretty you know pretty recent. And yeah, so we don't use them in races and grand tours or anything. I think, personally, I feel like there's definitely a lot of gain there. And from guys I've talked to, and even just in the peloton, you see, ketones getting down every stage before, after, during, and I think there are some really positive benefits to them, but yeah, we're not taking them.
Okay. Let's come full circle with something for the young Kevin who might be 16 listening. What's just a piece of advice that someone's giving you, or not like, I don't want to say like a motto, but just something that has stuck with you through as you started racing, got into it, that maybe you still think of today that's really just helped you stay on the track? This is such a hard sport. You get so many more losses than wins. What's a piece of advice or just words of encouragement that you could throw out there to some of the younger riders that listen to this and say, man, I want to try and race the Giro. I want to try and go to the Tour. I want to do what Kevin's doing.
Yeah, I think like you said, it's a journey, and I think it's easy to romanticize it. And I remember watching the Tour as a kid, and you see the peloton riding through the sunflower fields, and it's sunny, and they're all just chatting, and all the new bikes were shiny and washed every day, and that was just the vision that I had in my head as a kid. That was kind of like what pro cycling was, and yeah, it's definitely a very brutal sport. It's funny. Like, I was riding with Laurie Warbass the other day, and we were talking about how, like, you need to be OCD enough to be able to you know do everything that you can control to 100% of your ability, but then you also have to be relaxed enough to be able to go with the flow. And your race program gets changes last minute, and like things are always changing in pro cycling. And it's like, like I was saying about the training, you come into the season with having controlled everything you can, but then once you start racing, like, crashes happen, injuries happen, sickness happens, lineup changes happen. There's only 30 guys on a World Tour team, and, like at the moment we have, almost a third of the team is injured or sick. And so lineups change all the time. You have to get called into races you weren't supposed to do, and things are always changing. When you see the phone ring, and you never know, it could be like, you're off to this race, this is changing. And I think that can be really hard for a lot of guys, because in training you're tracking the numbers and you're tracking your calories, and like you can track everything, but you know big things are changing all the time. So I think it's just, I was really lucky growing up to have, my dad was a really positive influence on me. He raced when he was younger. And also Simon Kessler, my first coach who I talked about, he also was really important in my journey, just, always kind of being there to talk to. I still talk to him super frequently, especially on the mental side of things, but just to always enjoy the journey and kind of be grateful for what you have. I was incredibly lucky. I had the chance to ride for Lux and for Action, and without those chances, who knows where my career would be. I have friends I've raced with since I was 15 who, maybe weren't quite at the same level, but they just never got the opportunities because, especially in the US, they're so limited. And if you don't make that certain cutoff, the chance of going pro is just realistically, almost zero. And I think that's really unfortunate for a lot of young Americans. It is such a hard sport to get into. And, like I said, getting to the World Tour seems like the end goal when you're a junior and you're an under 23. But, you know, once you actually get there, you realize it's just the beginning. And I think, having the mentors I did, like my dad and Simon, to kind of be able to guide me through the process, and just keep me humble, but also, keep me focused on the long-term goal. Like, I turned pro and I wasn't a Remco or a Pogacar or like this super hyped up junior talent, but I always have and still do have a lot of faith in, my abilities and what I can achieve in the sport. And I think it's kind of having that overarching goal of always knowing, like, okay, 5 years down the road, where do I want to be? And how do I see myself, as a cyclist, and also, as a person? And I think just always having that in the back of your mind just gives you the consistency to, go do your training every day, do your stretching in the morning, little things like that. But then also just the ability to, roll with the punches, when your lineup gets changed and you've been training for 4 weeks for, race X, and then, you get sent to race Y, which is a week earlier than you had planned. And, it's easy to just let these things frustrate you. But, um, I think cycling especially is a sport where you just have to, when the opportunity comes to you, you never know when it comes, but you just have to take it with both hands and make the most of it. And I think that's kind of something I've learned over the last couple years, and hopefully can use to my advantage in the next couple years as I, keep working towards that point I want to get to.
Do you find naturally you better at the being the OCD part and getting all the details dialed, or a little bit better at going with the flow of, hey man, you're going to the Giro, or hey, you're going here?
I think I'd say I'm somewhat in the middle, trending more towards the OCD part.
Ah,
Just in terms of like, I really like to have a goal to work towards, and I mean, that's the thing I love about cycling is it's such a, like, you can track everything. You can see how much you're progressing, and um, everything is so numbers oriented that you can really it's easy to set a goal and then work towards the goal. And okay, this is what I need to do to get there. And it's kind of a case of just executing. And
yeah.
I find that really attractive. But I think, sometimes I've struggled with kind of, you know, letting go a little bit, and just like I said earlier, taking the chances that are given to you. But I think it's something I've gotten better at, and especially, this season, like my schedule was from the December camp when I sat down with the team is completely different from what I ended up doing. And luckily I actually had quite a bit of heads up of that things were changing. And like, I mean, the Giro I knew about, in February, and I already had an altitude camp planned with the team and everything. So, um, it wasn't super last minute or anything, but it was just kind of that process of, back in December when, I kind of had a plan given to me, and maybe I wasn't super stoked on it, but just knowing like, okay, all I can do is just wake up and then control what I can control and do my job 100%. And,
Mhm.
if you do that, I really believe that the opportunity will come to you. And when it does, then you just have to make the most of it.
That's amazing. What's my last question? Actually, now that I'm thinking back to the beginning of the podcast, you'd mentioned when you were moving from Girona, as you just signed in the World Tour. So, were you over there by yourself in Girona at like 18 years old?
So yeah, when I was under 23 with Action, my first year, kind of, that was the first time I came over to Europe without any like supervision, let's say. I mean, when we were a junior, we would come over with Billy Innes, who was the national team director for us, and it kind of felt like summer camp. And then when I went over as an under 23, my dad's side of the family is from Belgium. So
Yeah.
he still has some aunts and uncles and everything that are in Belgium. So in the beginning, I think I spent like 3 weeks in Girona. But we just got an Airbnb with two of my teammates, Cole Davis and Eddie Anderson at the time. And that was the first time I was like in Europe on my own. Like, you can do whatever you want. And that was pretty cool. But at the same time, it still felt like exciting, and it was just a pretty short trip to Girona, so it didn't feel like, oh, you're here for good to set up. It just was
Mm.
a bit easier to move like from race to race, and I was still living out of a suitcase, and also having that family in Belgium. That's kind of where I spent the most time throughout the season, with them. So that gave me a bit more of a home feel as well. But yeah, then when I turned pro and I moved to Girona full time, I just had an apartment by myself. Um, and that was kind of when things, yeah, got a bit more serious.
The reason I'm asking is we're talking about all these juniors and younger riders. Do you think that's a huge benefit, or maybe a must to get over there as early as possible, especially with a lot of American racing kind of dwindling on the road?
I think you have to find the right compromise because,
Yeah.
I think for racing wise, I think, yes, you definitely have to get over there and experience at least what what's out there. Even when I was junior, I was lucky enough that there's, still more, quite a bit more opportunity to race in the U.S. Um, but I remember there would be, the kids that were winning at the Valley of the Sun and the San Dimas stage races, like some of those big junior races, like, that was kind of the benchmark for, what good was considered. But, when you come over to Europe, then you realize it's a whole different ball game. And, we were really lucky with USA Cycling that Billy Innes kind of took us over there, showed us how to race, and just got us the exposure. I was doing a few road races already in Europe when I was 15, and I think that was really, yeah, that was really pivotal, and I think it does make a big difference. But at the same time, I think, especially now with really young guys signed to the World Tour when they're like 18, I think it shouldn't be underestimated how big of a cultural shift it is to go over there. So I think it's, if you're lucky enough and, you know, if you can experience it in those kind of short periods of like maybe you go over for a month or you go over for, a couple of weeks and try and do as much racing as you can. I think that's a really good way to kind of ease into things without really jumping straight into the deep end. And then, I think it's really easy to get homesick, get burnt out, and you just say, you know what, like, it doesn't matter how good I am on a bike. Like, I just want to be in the US. And I think that's something that a lot of guys can deal with. And at the end of the day is probably the biggest reason there's not more Americans in the World Tour, I think, is just, a lot of guys don't want to do it. Like, it's takes a lot of sacrifice to move over to Europe. And um, yeah, you really have to just make sure you're comfortable with a life change like that if it's something you're going to try and pursue.
Mm. This was an amazing podcast, Kevin. So many gems. You have a very articulate way of describing the things going on in your life into words. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. My last question is, obviously, we connect on Instagram, so we'll post your handle there. Do you blog or tweet or TikTok or any other social channels that people can follow you on, maybe Strava?
I have Strava. Strava and Instagram are the two things I have. I don't post so much on Strava,
Okay.
but I usually put all my races up there and some photos and stuff. But no, I'm a bit of an anti-social media proponent. So yeah, I'm not no TikTok for me, no Twitter, but I am on Instagram, so you can find me there.
A question I've actually never asked because I feel like I know the answer. Not posting things on Strava, maybe just because you don't like social media, or is that do teams? I know that some guys they get to a certain level and they stop posting power, they stop doing that. Do teams limit that, or is that just hey, I don't need other guys knowing what I'm doing?
I think it's just, I mean, yeah, I think it's all. I don't think there's any. Maybe there's a few teams that like, they'll say don't post your stuff on Strava, but I mean, I think it's more so just like, guys playing mind games and, it's kind of this thing where it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna hide my ride so people don't see what I'm doing, but it's like, everyone knows what everyone's doing, and it's not really, you know, especially now, you can work out what power someone is doing on a climb in a race, or I don't think there's much to hide or gain from, hiding your rides on Strava. But I think for me, it's just a bit more of like a, yeah, privacy thing. And, with social media in general, tend to be a bit more, yeah, do my stuff in silence and not want to post everything and show everything. Um, but yeah, it is funny when, guys are, I think, trying to play mind games with the Strava and, only post the rides over 6 hours. That's the key.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, guys. Hit him up on Instagram. You might not see much, but that's okay. He's moving in silence, and I love that. Good luck with the races, and we'll talk to you soon.